So I'm just going to very briefly lay out what our task was. The purpose of this study was to analyze the PIAAC data with the aim of, of examining the importance of readiness to learn to adult literacy skills, as well as their uses of these and other important skills in different contexts. Adult readiness to learn is not our term. It's a term that was used within the PIAAC, and we will define it more, or we'll attempt to define it more as we go along. So a brief overview before we get into the research questions is that we're looking at, does readiness to learn predict skill outcomes in terms of literacy, numeracy, and poster, I like that. And then does RTL predict use of skills at home and at work? And then we look particularly at mediating and moderating effects of RTL on the relationship between selected variables, we'll get into that, and skill level use. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what we did.
Previous indications from just reviewing PIAAC and some of the research that has come before has certainly, and we've heard a number of times today, that the U.S. population is falling behind on these skill levels. That U.S. adults maybe has come out in some of the reports. U.S. adults have scored relatively higher on the use of skills. And so there is something of at least a discrepancy that has been pointed to between skill level and skill use that we thought was worth exploring some more, or that was interesting at least. It will be part of our study. A bit of review of literature. The PIAAC data permits an examination of, as we've said, the literacy skill levels and skill use at home and in the workplace. Previous studies using the PIAAC have looked at skills in terms of human capital quite a bit. Relationship to earnings, someone earlier today I think mentioned Hanashuk et al. From 2013, and Allen, Levels, and Vandervelden had obtained data that pointed to this discrepancy between skill level and skill use. We did not see previous literature that looked particularly at non-cognitive factors and how those might relate to these skills and to the skill use. And the PIAAC background questionnaire did include factors that were a part of RTL. We became interested in RTL for our own reasons, and as we looked at the background questionnaire and at the conceptual papers that had preceded it, we found there were numerous ways of thinking about what RTL might be. These are some of the factors that were being considered in how we thought about it as a non-cognitive construct. At the end of the day, and after first developing a much longer lit review that our reviewers encouraged us to modify because it covered so much landscape it wasn't always clear, we resorted to simply sharing today our operational definition for readiness to learn, which is based on how it was actually measured in the background questionnaire. And I'll show you on the next slide. I don't know how well you'll see them, but essentially these are the items that were part of the Learning to Readiness scale. And it seems that they actually tap into some different dimensions of these non-cognitive variables. Oops, how did I get there? I skipped one. I skipped something earlier, sorry. But for instance, the second item looks at curiosity for learning, we thought. The one that says, I like learning new things. Items 1 and 3 look at things like approaches to overcoming difficulty and cognitive scaffolding. And the last several items all look at problem solving in some way, or looking at connections between our existing knowledge and previous knowledge. But essentially those were the indicators that we had to work with in terms of looking at readiness to learn. And Cecil is up next.
So this is my bit very briefly. Amy alluded to our research questions. We had two sets of 3 questions. The first set of questions pertaining to readiness to learn, predicting skill outcomes, and then looking at the extent to which readiness to learn mediates partially or fully the effects of these important demographic background factors, age, education, gender, and work experience on the skill levels, and also looking at the extent to which readiness to learn moderates the effects of these background factors. So what are the interactions between readiness to learn and the background factors in terms of skill levels? And then the second set of questions pertains to skill uses. So just plug in skill uses for skills there. They're the same, basically the same questions. I don't think I have to spend much time on our method. Our sample was the U.S. sample, so about 5,000 adults with population. You can see the more specific information in regards to the age distribution, gender distribution, and so on here on the slide. Average educational attainment and years of work experience, about 20 years on average in the population. So we conducted a series of regression analyses, multiple regression analyses. Again, the dependent variables, skill level and skill use, and our predictor variables, readiness to learn, and then the various demographic background variables. So Tom won the coin toss, so he gets to present our very interesting findings for you.
So our findings for the first research question, which was how does readiness to learn predict these three skill outcomes in addition to these other variables we included in there. We found that readiness to learn significantly and positively predicted each of the three skills, literacy, numeracy, and poster, I guess is our term here. And however, the relative strength for the prediction of readiness to learn was weak. And the other predictors, education, as we've consistently seen, was a positive, strong predictor of all three skills. And age was a relatively weak negative predictor of literacy and numeracy. However, it was a relatively strong negative predictor of poster. And then years of full-time work experience, that was a relatively weak predictor, and gender was a weak predictor of numeracy and poster. And here it was males scoring higher than females for numeracy and problem solving in technology-rich environments. And this is just a graphic that shows out of the total variation explained by the variables in the model, what proportion was explained by each. And as you can see here, education, which is the tan, was the predominant predictor. Readiness to learn was significant, but it wasn't a large predictor. You can see readiness to learn there in the blue. And this is for literacy. And age entered in there too to a greater extent than did readiness to learn. And again, age was a negative predictor of literacy. And numeracy, again, education, the predominant predictor, readiness to learn, significant but not strong. And then problem solving, age a little bit, education a little less predominant. Readiness to learn, again, was significant but not strong. Age comes in a little bit stronger here as a negative predictor. So older individuals had lower skills. And for research question 2, which was looking at the mediating effects, we found that readiness to learn partially mediated or partially explained the effects of education, age, work experience on each of the three skill outcomes. It did not mediate the effects of gender on skills. And just as a graphic, as an example of this mediation effects, if you look at the effect of gender on literacy skill, education on literacy skill, education controlling for the other variables in the model, everything except readiness to learn, accounted for about 29% of literacy skill differences. And when we entered in readiness to learn, that really explained about 1% of that 29% that education was explaining. So it partially mediated the effects of education. And similarly, when we looked at age, age accounting for the other variables in the model accounted for about 7.5% of the variability in problem-solving skills. When we entered in readiness to learn in the model, it explained about 0.5% of that 7.5%. And then the third research question was how does readiness to learn moderate or change the effects of gender, age, work experience, and education on those three outcomes? We found that readiness to learn did moderate significantly moderated the effects of education on literacy and numeracy skills, and it also moderated the effects of age on both literacy and numeracy. And as an example of that, here we're looking at basically the effects of education on literacy skills, and obviously the low education workers had lower literacy skills, the higher education workers had higher literacy skills, but you can see it differed depending upon what level of readiness to learn they had. At the lower educational level, the readiness to learn made more of a difference in their literacy scores than it did at the high education level. And similarly, when we looked at age differences in numeracy, you can see at younger ages, this readiness to learn had more of an effect on the numeracy scores than it did at higher ages. And then research question 4, which paralleled research question 1, except that it looked at the use of skills. Here we found that readiness to learn positively predicted each of the 3 skills, both at home and at work. And the relative strength of prediction for readiness to learn was strong for skill use at home, but was weak for skill use at work. And so again, these pie charts here, you can see readiness to learn here in the purple, I think that is, on that screen, actually was the strongest predictor of reading skill use at home, and it trumped out even education here in terms of the use of this skill. But when we looked at reading skill use at work as opposed to at home, then readiness to learn becomes a much a weaker predictor than education, although it's still important. And then similarly, writing skill use at home, readiness to learn very predominant, the strongest predictor, but then writing skill use at work, the effect of readiness to learn lessens and education becomes more important. And then for numeracy skill use at home, readiness to learn, not quite as important as age here, but still fairly important. And then at work, the effect of readiness to learn lessens, and it becomes fairly equal amongst the different predictors. And then the ICT skill use at home, again, readiness to learn fairly strong, but then at work it weakens. And then research question 5, paralleling research question 2, the mediation effects. We found that readiness to learn consistently partially mediated the effect of education, work experience, and age on skill use, both at home and in the workplace, with effects similar to what occurred with skill levels. It did not mediate or explain gender differences in skill use. And then readiness to learn for the 6th research question, it did moderate or change the effect of education on ICT skill use at work, numeracy skills at home, and reading skills at home and at work.
So very quickly, we're going to go over the implications. So first of all, adult education practices that enhance readiness to learn among low education workers may be important. We need to leverage learning readiness in the workplace toward the application of a more diverse array of skills. And what we were thinking about here is that a lot of attention in workplace learning talks about transfer of learning from training programs to the actual work situation. And it may be important to start thinking about transfer of skill from home to work. But again, this isn't entirely clear. It's just an idea that we're playing around with. It's also important to look at individual interest, curiosity, and the ability to derive meaning from ideas and concepts. So transfer could be encouraged by establishing more meaningful connections between work experience and the individual's idea of what would be needed for new learning. Because this concept of readiness to learn seems to have greater a greater relationship to the kinds of learning that takes place at home, which may be derived from a more contextualized sense of need. Another implication could lie in the allocation of training resources. So workplace training that is appropriately contextualized for low literacy and low skill individuals may be particularly beneficial, but contextualized in terms of interest, not only just in terms of the workplace, the new skills. So, further research questions. The first one deals really with, well, what is readiness to learn? And so if you have another hour, we can talk about that. But, and then the relationship between readiness to learn and other constructs, such as employment status, civic engagement, skill development, and skill use in diverse settings. I'm sorry, I haven't been talking into this. Then, what is the relationship between readiness to learn and participation in adult education activities? And there's already been a lot of talk today about participation, and another piece would be to look at what is the connection, relationship between readiness to learn and participation, informal and non-formal. How does the relationship between readiness to learn and skill level use differ between countries? This was focused totally on the United States, and the next step would be really to look at some of the other countries using the PIAAC data. Because this is a European term, this is not our term. So we can do that. And then what are the psychometric properties of scores from the readiness to learn scale? And as we say, is readiness to learn a thing? We're not sure.